Before I get started, I wanted to tell a little bit of a story. So obviously I've been working for a long time, lost a lot of hair. I did work at Gillette. I do not shave my head with a Gillette razor. But it's a story about when I joined Procter & Gamble Company. So I worked at a large consultancy for a number of years. Worked my way up into like a managerial position, and then was out in San Francisco and lost my job. I worked for, it was during the dot-com boom and bust. If you're old enough, you probably remember when that happened. Hopefully we don't go through that again. And a friend said, hey, he worked at P&G. He said, come to P&G, we're hiring lots of designers. And I said, sure, okay, great. It was my hometown. I grew up in Cincinnati, so I knew what I was getting into. And I was like, okay, great, I can do this. And I got there and things started off good. Made some new acquaintances. Then my boss said one day, go have this meeting, with the R&D team, and start this project, get this thing going. And so I went in there, and I'm full of confidence. I'm like, I've been doing this for a long time. I know my stuff. I can do this. And I show up, and I was like, okay, design's here. We're ready to go. And looked at the engineer across the table, and she said, what exactly do you do? And I was flabbergasted. I was like shocked. I was like, the designers had been in P&G for quite a while. I figured everybody knew what we did. It was just surprising. I said, well, I'm here to learn about the users and how do we design a better product. And she said, okay, but that's what we do. So I'm sure that if some of you have had that experience before. So that was my introduction to P&G. Now, of course, already I'm thinking, okay, did I make a mistake or something like that? Am I in the wrong building? But I persisted. I hung out for a while, and got to know what the ecosystem was like. But I was used to the consulting world where people come to you because of your expertise. You have a skill. They recognize that. They say, hey, we want you to design our next great thingamajob. So when I got to P&G, they didn't even know what we did. So that was a rude awakening, but it does get better. So there's some of my team. Design thinking it's kind of a buzzword. I'm sure you guys have all heard of it. It's been around for quite a while. In some ways, if you're a designer and you're cynical like I am sometimes, we've been doing this for a long time, But it really sort of hit its stride when Tim Brown wrote this article in the Harvard Business Review, and I think this was 2008. Now it had sort of hit the mainstream, and everybody was talking about it, right? So that and even P&G was talking to Tim Brown. If you've ever been in sort of a design thinking session, that sort of thing, this is what it looks like. It's a gajillion Post-it notes. 3M should thank people for doing design thinking because we use a lot of Post-it notes. And happy smiling faces. People are having fun, right? So, and then you're creating some things, you're drawing some things. It's a good activity for people. For us, because I'm at GE now, our building that from product to design thinking challenge is much the same as these other companies. Everyone's been there already before us into it. There's a Disney Institute that actually takes some of the practices of Disney and shares them with other corporations, JetBlue, P&G, who I'll talk about, Target. The list goes on and on. Probably some of you in the room have been through this kind of training out at the D schools. Some of the folks that have evangelized this, of course, IDEO, Tim Brown and those guys, and the Stanford D School, which actually I got to go and get trained in when I was at P&G. And over time, it's had sort of its ups, say like Intuit, if anybody knows their Design for Delight and how they were trying to build that into the corporation. IDEO, again, big proponent of it. But it's also had its downs. So Bruce Nussbaum wrote this a number of years ago after being a big proponent of it initially when he was running the Business Week issue for industrial design and all those awards. He said, these corporations have sort of pulled it in, turned it into another, Six Sigma or CAP process and just sort of, sucked the life out of it, so to speak. And so you're only getting incremental change, which is probably somewhat valid. But, there was somebody of prominence going, this was the first shot across the bow that, hey, maybe this doesn't work. And then I found this recently. I don't know if anybody, so this is Natasha Jen from Pentagram, who was at the 99U conference earlier this year, and this was her talk. Design thinking is bullshit. And I thought it was too great not to include this. And she was kind of, I didn't get to see the talk, I wish I had, but it's a valid point. And again, designers are a little bit cynical, so, is it really bullshit? So maybe I'll dispel that notion, I don't know. But why? Why are some having success and some not, maybe? So I'm going to contrast two stories of mine. When I joined P&G, which was 2002 or roughly about there, and then at GE. So it's really a tale of two companies and two stories, and then two journeys. So we'll start with P&G, and this is my P&G career summed up. I worked there for 9 years. Diapers and razors. You couldn't get more diametrically opposed products, but when I first joined P&G, I worked on Pampers. I was a diaper designer. So I'm really proud of that. But a lot of what we were trying to, this image there sort of represents what we were trying to do. What other garment does your kid wear 24/7 for 3 years? It's a diaper. It's clothing. So we were trying to take that metaphor and play it out and figure out what clothing was like. And I was at Gillette during the time when we developed the Flex Ball razor. So that's the one that's out on the market now, which pivots to contour to catch your face. When I went to Gillette, there was not a single person that didn't say to me, "You're just going to add another blade, aren't you?" And that's your innovation path, because it was well known. And actually we didn't. This was the first time Gillette did a handle innovation. So, and the handle was in the domain of my industrial design team. And it provided a benefit. So backing up to the P&G story, you probably can't quite read this, but basically A.G. Lafley, who was the CEO at the time, had worked in Japan, came back to the States, and he got like design religion. And he said, we need to build design into the DNA of P&G. And so he asked the woman on the right there, Claudia Kochka, who was actually not a designer, she had a marketing background, to take this charge on. Build me a design team and make it work. So she saw a lot of value in that. So of course she reached out to the experts, right? Tim Brown and Roger Martin and those kind of folks to learn more about it. So P&G started hiring lots and lots of designers. So I came into that first wave, and the design function at P&G went from 70 people to 300 in about 2 years. So floods of designers. They also realized that they couldn't just get them all out of school. They had to get experienced designers. If we were going to get a leg up on this, we had to get people that had been working for a while. So, and then we learned that we needed a lot of tools and training. They sent a wave of us, probably about 30 of us, out to the Stanford D School to learn more about design thinking. Along the way, at P&G, all these designers, great creative minds, we created a lot of processes. I was involved in one of them, the Lighthouse process, which was really about projecting out, no holds barred. If you could provide anything to your consumer, what would she want? P&G almost exclusively focuses on women, on moms, because they run the household. When I went to Gillette, it was the flip. It's mostly about men. But the idea was, if you could give them anything, what would that look like? So it's the lighthouse, it's the guiding light, and then that would tell you how to redirect your technology development. Lofts were about reinvigorating some of our sleepier brands. Clay Street was an expertise we borrowed from Mattel. We actually hired the guy from Mattel, where you would incubate a team for 3 months to work on a business challenge. So you get to leave your business for 3 months, and that's all that you work on. And then the gym we got from IDEO, which was basically a workout space, a place where you could be creative. So we're doing all this stuff, and there's some images of some of those spaces. And one of the things that came out of that was the Clara Arbor Essences was a sleepy brand that had lost 70% of its market share. It just was tanking. So they did a Clay Street exercise and came out as more of a millennial brand. So they re-envisioned it, and then profits came back up. So the Capital One guy, there you go. There's your profits. They also They also created a cross-company. P&G is not as well known as all their brands. They make Crest and Swiffer and Olay and CoverGirl and Pampers and Tide. Just look around your house, you have P&G products in them probably. But they never advertised about the company brand. So through design thinking, they ran a couple of design thinking workshops, was how do we do this? How do we leverage this story about P&G and what we're all about? And they created this. They created the Thank You Mom campaign. So if you've ever, in the 20-year relationship, sorry, looks like the M dropped off, the relationship with the Olympic Committee. So they're advertising that every time. And it's about, if moms are our customer and we're just there in support of them, they're building, the children of tomorrow kind of thing. So it's a really, touchy-feely, kind of place to be. So it was only enabled by working in a different kind of way. So flip over to, so I worked there for about 9 years. Someone called me up and said, hey, there's this great job in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And actually, Rich asked me earlier, how do you like living in Milwaukee? I was like, it's like Chicago, but cheaper. We have the same lake. But somebody said, I already have a great job, working at Gillette. But much like Shelley mentioned this morning, and the opportunity to sort of improve lives, in the healthcare space was intriguing to me. So these are just sort of a smattering of some of the things that we do up there. I'll show you some more. But my boss was focused on how can design be a strategic partner for growth. He really wanted us to be positioned that way, and not the last decoration station, which was his sort of term. We actually used to use that at P&G. My boss used to work there as well. Is that oftentimes design is relegated to make it pretty before it goes out the door. So we're trying not to do that. So this is one of my heroes. This is Doug Dietz. Doug actually works for me. He's a designer, trained as an industrial designer. He designed a lot of some of those products you were just looking at. When my boss came to GE, having us gone through the design thinking exercise at P&G, he said, well, I want to bring this into GE. And so he sent Doug to the D school, and so he got trained in design thinking. And it really made an impact on him, and it kind of allowed him to re-envision his career. And this was one of the first things that he created. And I know there's some people in the audience I was talking to earlier have probably seen this before. This is what we call the Pediatric Adventure Series. And so what you see down there in the bottom right is what a CT machine looks like, in its normal state. And we designed that. We're very proud of it. But when you think about it, and if you want to hear the full story, Doug's got a TEDx talks where he goes through this whole thing. I'm pretty sure he's breaking into tears at one point, which he often does. Healthcare is a very emotional place to be. But he saw that his wonderfully designed piece of equipment scared children. And actually, I was thinking about not doing this, but I'm going to do it anyways. If you guys can indulge me and grab the hand of the person sitting next to you, hold hands. I know Ruben probably promised you there would be no hand holding. Now you guys are having too much fun. So now you're making a real connection. Now do this for me. Just give an ever so slight squeeze to that person that's holding your hand. Just squeeze their hand just a little bit. All right, somebody's probably squeezing too hard. All right, you can unless you want to keep holding hands, you can let go. So I mean, but that's the meaningful sort of thing that touched Doug was that imagine your child and you're holding their hand, and you walk into a room and you see that, and at that moment, that child might squeeze mom's hand just a little bit harder, and if mom squeezes back, they're going to lose it, right? That's it. I mean, this happened to me actually before I joined GE. My son needed an MRI. He was fine. He was 9 years old. Walked in, saw that MRI machine, boom, literally bolted down the hallway. You know what happens to kids that won't get in on the machine? We knock them out. We sedate them, which has all kinds of implications, that sort of thing. But what could be a 40-minute exam turns into 3 hours. 3 hours with a groggy kid in the car ride home. It's horrible. If you're a parent, it's a horrible thing. So those are things that we try and focus on. And the neat thing about this, turning it into an adventure, making it a story. You give a kid a reason to get up on there. This one's the Coral City adventure, and you say, you're going on the Yellow Submarine. Hold still, because you don't want to bump into the coral. And they do it, and then we don't have to sedate them. So that's UPMC's data. So we like it. It's a really nice story. The other thing that I love about it, there's no new technology here. This is the same technology you use to put stickers on a city bus. Same thing. And this was never a requirement in building that machine. Never a requirement that it should not scare a kid. So that's the kind of space that we like to work in. Doug helped push that one along. So design thinking. So Doug took on this practice of design thinking. Initially, it was a bit of a secret. We just started, we were looking for somebody to work on with the team. My boss's boss said, hey, I don't want this to become a thing, don't give it a name. So we ignored him, and then we ended up calling it Menlo. It's named after Edison's Menlo Park Lab. So Thomas Edison is the founder of General Electric Company. And so it's in his spirit that we do this sort of thing. So we created a brand around it. So that gives it a little bit of its own ethos. The other thing about Edison that's an interesting thing is everybody knows him as this great inventor. But he didn't do that stuff alone. That's a picture of some of the craftsmen and workers that he worked with to develop some of his great inventions. It took a team, So in that spirit, we work with teams in our design thinking practice. I'll see if this, and if you indulge me, I think if you create a little video for it, I don't know if it's going to run. Trying to get this thing to run in here. You know what, I'll skip that for the sake of time. But I mean, part of that too is creating a brand around it. We have this little video that we share with team just so they know what they're getting into. We branded it. And this is something I learned from P&G. This is sort of a reapplication of, as once you sort of give it a name and there's this ethos behind it, people, they start calling it. It starts word of mouth. It starts to work up on you. So the things that I would contrast between my experience at P&G and now at GE is, one was built from the top down. A.G. Lafley saying, build design into the DNA of the company. And the other one, we've been doing this really more bottom up. My boss, was the one that said, hey, we're just gonna do this. So in a lot of ways, we had cover from the CEO of the company and the person in charge of all of the design function, in charge of all these 300 people. But the caveat is we did annoy people, is because they're like, what are you guys doing? You have all these crazy practices, but we kept doing it. And in the GE instance, it's bottom up. My GM said, hey, we should do this. He had taken some initial criticism for it. His boss said, let's not make this a thing. At P&G, it had broad reach across different functions. So the way they built sort of our design thinking community wasn't just design. There was marketing people in there and commercialization people and packaging and R&D folks. It was broad. About 600 people total, I think. And then at GE, I have a small dedicated team. I was telling some folks about this earlier. So I have 3 people that this is all that they do. I have a few people that do it part-time. And then we leverage the army we don't control. That's my boss's expression for it. So people that have been through sessions with us, seem to have an aptitude for it. They like it. They want to do more of it. We're like, great, come in and be a coach. Help pay it forward, help the next team. So we have a whole network of people throughout the company, and they're not designers, that help us out with this stuff. At P&G, initially, primarily, it was focused on brands, because they're very much a heavy branding company, or the product, But, it would stretch a little bit, the Thank You Mom campaign's an example. At GE, it has evolved from initially helping product teams into we spend more time helping, businesses create visions. So GE is made up of separate divisions, ultrasound and MR and CT, and it's surprising how many of them lack this sort of guiding light, sort of a lighthouse or a vision. So we actually use this practice. It actually scales really well to help them with in that regard. Sometimes it's really, what they always call the sticky business, challenges. We can't solve this. How do we build market share, et cetera? So it actually has evolved away from products. And then this is one thing that I actually didn't like about P&G. We made it so flexible that sometimes people would say, we can do it over lunch. We'll just have a lunch session, we'll run through the practice, and we'll come out the other end with ideas. It's the old college thing, I'll just buy you a pizza and you'll come up with some ideas. I didn't like that so much. At GE, we always say it takes the first day just to scrape the GE off of you, And it's true, because you're married to your practices and your mindsets, et cetera. So we have to sort of shake it up a little bit. So we spend about 2 to 5 days doing this sort of stuff. This is what it looks like. So we actually have our own space dedicated to it. It's a flexible space, where the furniture can move around a little bit. Of course, we have the typical, prototyping materials, et cetera. Despite that, we often say, we can do this in a parking lot. And in certain exercises, we do in a parking lot. We've done it with customers. I could do it in this room. It should be that, The only thing is, like a surgeon, if you have a space, that it makes it repeatable. So we have all the stuff we need to do in this space. A lot of people think about, well, it's the Menlo space. I just need to go in the Menlo space, and it's not the space, it's what you do in it. Like this. This is what we call Fireside Chats. So we bring people in. These are some of the business leaders. Sometimes it's doctors. We just sit them down, and we're just going to have a conversation like you're sitting around a campfire. Very different interaction than what they normally get. Normally they get the GE salesperson that comes in that wants to sell them something and ask them, well, what do you want? But all the while knowing that they're trying to sell something. So this is just a little bit of a different approach, and it gets people to relax, and we're just having a conversation. Of course, there's the typical sort of team dynamics, and then working around, the Post-its and all that kind of stuff. So we have that in the space. This might be a little bit hard to see, but we've extended it to doing it with customers. So this is from UCSF in San Francisco, their new Benioff Children's Hospital. So we worked with them doing this practice to try and think about the challenge, even though we ended up doing this nice adventure series theme around Muir Woods, was they wanted to think about their role in the community. And this exercise that they built says, world's largest family reunion. So they realized that they're there to provide care for all the families in San Francisco, and so they wanted it to be a place that people would feel comfortable coming to. This is our maternal infant care team. So these are we help them with their vision of sending moms and tiny babies home healthy. Whereas their practice before was they make infant warmers and incubators and stuff like that. They're trying to keep these babies alive, but they realized that their actual mission was to send moms and babies home healthy. So we helped them with that, and even some prototyping around some further ideas. So this team in particular has adopted these principles so much now that they want to have their own Menlo space in their office. There's also a lexicon around it. Yes And's a very famous one. We actually borrow that from Second City here in Chicago. A lot of people talk about that, but we have other ones about how we're trying to tap into people's team genius. Slow down to go faster later. The engineers hate it when we say that, but it's basically the hockey stick, right? It's like if we could just slow down and listen for a while and frame up the problem correctly, I guarantee you when we hit execution, it'll just take off like a rocket. WIBNI, W-I-B-N-I, means wouldn't it be nice if? So this is always our prompt that we use with our Post-it notes. Wouldn't it be nice if? Because a lot of times people rush to solutions. Sometimes they're rushing to the wrong solution. I love the if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen, because people love to talk. They love to talk, but they never write down what they're thinking about. And so we just tell them, well, then it didn't happen. So you gotta remember the future was the exercise you just saw with UCSF. And that the idea is project yourself out in the future and you're wildly successful. Tell your story about how you got there. So you're remembering the future. Design thinking mindsets are important to us. I mentioned team genius. We're trying to cultivate that, so it's not like the Edison lone inventor kind of thing. There's a genius in getting everybody to sort of work together, build prototypes, show, don't tell. You got to focus on the human. We're all about empathy. Creative confidence is kind of a newer one. Doug got written up in Tom Kelly's book about creative confidence. So these are all things that, and we talk about it as a mindset, because a lot of people say, well, tell me your process, especially at a company, a big corporation like GE. Well, what's the process we're going through? Tell me the design thinking process. And we're like, there is some process elements to it, but it's really about getting yourself into these mindsets. You really need to sort of adopt these in order to sort of move things forward. We take inspiration from others. Actually, Simon Sinek is one of our favorites. Has anybody seen some of his videos? Phenomenal speaker, way better than me. You probably saw his millennial speech from like last year, but if you back up, he had a leadership one about, in his book about, it starts with why. So we really spent a lot of time focusing on that. And he shares in one of his TEDx talks about the golden circle. And he says a lot of companies communicate from the outside in. They can tell you what they make and how they make it, and then stop, don't you want to buy it? He said the really clever companies like the Apples of the world, et cetera, communicate from the inside out. They tell you why. Tells what their motivation is. So when I think about the why for the maternal infant care team was, our why is to send moms and babies home healthy. That was tremendously motivating for them, and it gets everyone to sort of rally around that. So this is an important construct that we borrow from Simon, and we share that with the company. It's amazing how much it transforms people. And then sometimes it transforms people in their personal lives, because they want to ask themselves, well, what's my personal why? Why do I get out of bed in the morning? So it's a good one, so you should watch that one. So back to P&G, since I left, and keeping up with my old friends there, that sort of thing. Some of the challenges that they've experienced in sort of, maintaining their momentum around design thinking. Well, AG retired. He actually retired and came back. But he retired. Claudia, who's the leader of the design function, Claudia Kachka, retired. P&G has this funny way of retiring you when you're 55. So keep that in mind if you ever want to work there. And then the leader of the design thinking function, the one that was in charge of it that worked for Claudia, Cindy Tripp, who's a good friend of mine, also retired, thinking they left this in good hands. And it's kind of backed up. It's kind of lost a little bit of momentum. There isn't a leader that's, what Cindy said, is no one's nurturing it. No one's nurturing it. So it sits there. That said, it persists because it's useful. It's still useful. So the practices around it, the mindsets, are useful to people, so they still use them. And the designers that are there, it's an important metric for them. So it's still there. It's ingrained in them. But it's probably not going to move along as fast as it could if somebody was there to sort of nurture it and build upon it. So for us, because we see a lot of teams, and our focus is on helping teams, if they're successful, they're able to maintain momentum beyond the session. So I've had a lot of interesting conversations, prior to this and then today with folks like from the Luma Institute, with Ruben, et cetera, about how do you do this? How do you maintain momentum? Some of it is just recognizing it, is that this will be a challenge for you, because we are kind of workshop based, and so we're trying to figure out how do we extend our own support to these teams, because they might go, oh, well, we were just in Menlo for a few days, it was awesome, that sort of thing, but now I got to go back to my job, and that sucks, and the rules are different. We're like, well, why does it have to be different? If your boss sent you here, if your boss was in the session, they understand that it's important that how do we maintain this momentum? So we spend some time talking about that. Having a champion helps. So with the maternal infant care business, the person running that business was in those sessions, helped create that vision, told them that we're sticking to this, and we're going to start to say yes and we're going to hear from the customer every week. Every week I want to hear something from the customer. So they're nurturing it. So that helps. And then they stay the course through the changes in leadership. Big corporation, leaders change a lot. This one is also particularly challenging because a lot of times the leader leaves, well then that's the old policy, right? But if it's still useful, if it's still ingrained in people, then it should keep going. Putting resources And funding around it are important. It's hard to do this thing on a little bit of a shoestring. So you have to get serious about it. I used to work with a woman at P&G that said, commitment looks like dollars. So you know that they're in if they're willing to sort of fund it and they find it again useful. And then doing the research. I mean, this probably should come first, you know. Okay, is that you got to do the research to really sort of understand what's the insight and what are you building that around. And then there were just willingness to take risk. I know this one is super hard, you know, but you have to have courage to do that, right? So what we're trying to do is embolden teams and make them feel like they can do that. So can design thinking impact service design? I mean, a lot of the perspective I come from and I shared with somebody earlier was GE's not really service design oriented. We're very product focused. It's interesting. So this is the CEO of GE who until recently was the CEO of GE Healthcare. And he said this, you know, we need to remain obsessed with the total customer experience and not just the machines themselves. So he is starting to help that sort of mind shift there. It always starts with empathy. I know this is probably also, you know, well known and not technology. So here's, you know, these are the parents that are having a baby, you know, that's in the NICU. So we created this warmer. It's an infant warmer that has a little touch of humanity in it. It's that giraffe. Our incubator, the brand is the giraffe, but nowhere on the product other than the logo was a giraffe. And we're like, you know, so when the baby is sleeping, the giraffe is sleeping. When the baby gains weight, the giraffe stands up and does a little dance. Because if you've ever had a kid in the NICU, when they gain weight, even an ounce, it's important. So we wanted to celebrate that. And this was drawn out of the research that we realized that the consumers of this information are not just the clinicians. The parents are sitting there eyeballing this thing all day long, hoping their baby gets out of there. So it's got to have some human in there. This was another exercise that we were looking at for liver cancer ablation procedures. Someone had this hypothesis, can we just make one doctor do this? It'll be so much cheaper. And then we found out, you know, very quickly, no, it's a team sport. And that primary doctor is the air traffic controller. And he's teaching some people, and then he's architecting some others. He's looking at these diagnostic images. There's like 5 to 7 people in here when you get a liver ablation. So you can quickly dispel notions that others have just by getting out there. And then how you turn that research into concepts. Of course, you know, we had a lot of fun building sloppy copies or crappy prototypes, you know. And I was talking to somebody earlier, I mean, that invites criticism, you know. Our engineering teams are used to making something completely beautiful and functional, sharing it with the customer and going, don't you love this? And they're like, yeah, you know. And they may, I mean, not that they didn't do their work right, but if it's perfect and pretty, well, why would you criticize that? So we give them, you know, crappy pieces of cardboard and they go, I like it, but I would put that down there, and we just rip it off and move it. So these are tools designers have had forever, but in a big corporation, that seems crazy, but you know, we're trying to get them comfortable with the idea that this is okay. Complicated environments, you know, a lot of different stakeholders. There's some of our equipment in there. There's data, diagnostic imagery, lots of people in there. This actually is more crowded than, you know, in reality when you actually see this instead of these beautiful pictures. But you have to think about all those people that are in there. Changing roles, Shelley mentioned this earlier. Radiologists sitting in the dark reading images is going to be an archaic thing in the future, so we have to be prepared for that. These guys really have to come out of the dark, you know, and talk to patients. And they don't want to do it. They really don't want to do it, which is weird. But we've also heard that a lot of people don't want to go to school to be a radiologist because they think it's a dying field because AI is going to replace it. But I think Shelley's probably more right, is that it's the combination of the two that probably make it stronger. But they have to change. So this is always important. Your context is not somebody else's. So this is somebody doing a ultrasound in, you know, Bangalore or something like that. You know, it's a little different environment, so you got to keep that in mind. So this is one of our CT pieces of equipment. You know, big imposing thing, and you could say what you want about the design, and you like it or not. But the designer, you know, is inspired to do something. So inside the bore, this is that opening that you get shoved into. There's something on the ceiling. You see that? So there's a pattern that we put in on the ceiling. If you look really closely, you'll see a fish. You'll see a swan. see other things in there. So that serves two purposes. One is just distraction. So you're in there, if you're feeling a little claustrophobic, you can distract yourself, look at that. But it's also, we wanted people to know that a human designed this thing. It is a big, scary machine that makes noise, but a human being designed it for another human being. So we wanted to, and it's funny how many arguments I had with engineers that wanted to take it off because it costs $18 on a machine that costs $500,000. I said, I will give you $18 for every one that you sell. They haven't taken me up on it yet, but it's still there. This is one of our latest piece of equipment, a mammography machine. I know these are probably not pleasant, but the designer for this, who's actually she's in our France office, was inspired years ago about how can I give a sense of control back to women, because that's what you're doing. A lot of times you enter the healthcare field, you're giving up a sense of control. You're handing your life, your loved one over to clinicians. And so one of the ideas that she had was, can we let a woman compress her own breast? Can we give her that control? Because, then she can control what's happening to herself. And actually, in their early testing with this is preferred 83% over, there's some data, over previous exams. And in fact, some women actually compress their breast more, which, is crazy to think about it. But yeah, that's that empathy that has to get built into the design. We have other aspects of this called the sensory experience to try and actually control other aspects of it, because I know this, again, is very product focused, but we want to build that sense of empathy into everything that we do. The power of story. I used to work with a guy that loves stories, that sort of thing. Okay, and I think they're very powerful. Some of the stories I told you today, this is how you learn. And you want to elicit stories when you talk to people that are accessing your products or in your service design network or whatever. You want to understand what stories they're going to tell. And so that's why we do Fireside Chats, to elicit that sort of thing. And it's a very powerful way to share from customers all the way through to your leadership. So don't underestimate that. These are just some of the testimonials. We've been doing this for 10 years. So, it had its slow start, that sort of thing, and definitely had its detractors. We had our own Bruce Nussbaums and that sort of thing. But once people go through it, it's kind of like, our joke is, it's like seeing fireworks. I can't explain it to you, but once you go through it, I can convince you'll come out transformed the other side. So we went back to that original question. I'm sure you can anticipate the answer because I'm a big proponent of this, but it's kind of a yes and. It's a qualified yes, because I believe you do have to evolve it. We can't stand still. So the first sessions we ran do not look like the ones that we do now. We know that teams have a hard time struggling getting back to their business and practicing this stuff day in and day out, so we're trying to help them. We're trying to not make it an episodic sort of thing and trying to give them some of those tools. And I know there's others of you out there that are doing the same sort of thing. But it goes back to what Cindy said about P&G that they lack now, is there's no one nurturing it. So you do have to have those in that network that are trying to nurture it, to try and treat it like a design concept and create the next iteration of it. So the last thing is I would focus on passion. So again, a lot of our focus, even though it seems like a problem-solving methodology or a set of principles, it's really about the team, and high-performing teams, get there by tapping into that group genius and their passion. So that's what we're really after. So the little trick that we play on teams is they think they're coming in to Menlo for us to solve their challenge, and instead we work on them. We try and make them a better team. And they have fun along the way. That's us playing with our parachute outside. And I work with a really wise man that says, if you're not having fun, it's half your fault. So we try and live by that up at GE Healthcare. And we ask people, who said you couldn't have fun at work? So hopefully you guys can tap into that as well. So thank you.
A few questions before we have to move on with the program. Got one back here. Go ahead. Oh, I'm going to ask a question while he's recovering that cube. The orange slide with the glossary, where you had you didn't write it down, it didn't exist, or it didn't happen.
Say that again.
That orange slide with all your glossary terms.
Oh, yes.
You had one that said fruit salad. I don't think I
Fruit
heard you say
salad.
what that means.
You don't know what fruit salad is? It's just an exercise that we play with people to sort of loosen them up. So you saw the folks in a big circle, so that's usually how we start a session. It's not uncommon to do that, but we play a game called fruit salad. So we get somebody to stand in the middle and say, you know, I love chocolate. And then everybody that loves chocolate has to, you know, switch places. And it's like a game of duck, duck, goose. I was talking, we just had a young designer join us who's far younger than me, and I said, do you even know what duck, duck, goose is? Do kids even play this anymore? Because it's not on an iPad. But yeah, it's like that. So then someone gets stuck in the middle, so now they have to come up with one. I mean, they may say, I like walking on warm beaches or something like that, and everybody that likes that has to switch places. Then we sort of turn the tables and ask them a thing about work. You know, I hate, you know, meetings with no agenda. And man, you never seen so many bodies collide. And then it starts to get them into like some of the things that are happening to them in their day-to-day life that they don't necessarily like, you know, and it sort of reveals itself. And then they also find out that, well, everybody feels this way. You know, who doesn't like going into a meeting that has no agenda? So it's just a game, you know, but we turn it into something from fun into let's get it focused on work.
All right, is this working? Great. My name's Eric. I work at Intuit, so great slides.
I give you props.
We're a design-led company and a product company, so I'm glad to see another product person speaking at a service design conference. There's not a lot of product people. I'm curious if you can hypothesize why service design would fail to thrive at a design-led product company.
Well, why it would fail?
Why would service design fail to thrive at a design thinking-led product company?
I don't think it would. I think it's a matter of perception. And I think maybe the thing is, what we're experiencing right now is I've got, I was trying to tell, I think Ruben earlier, there's like 50,000 people that work at GE Healthcare. And I've got a team of 12. So the mentality and what has provided success for the company has been selling products. So the idea to sort of look at the whole continuum of care and going, look, your product only has this little slice right here where somebody hops on your machine and gets a diagnostic image. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens ahead of that that may affect that and may affect that person, and then there's stuff that happens afterwards that, you know, honestly, that makes healthcare suck. You know, healthcare does kind of suck right now, so we're trying to focus on that broader aspect of it. So that is the challenge, is to get folks that are so much married to my job is to put out this awesome product that takes a picture. You know, the engineers hate to say that, but it takes a picture. And it helps somebody else make a decision about somebody you love. And wouldn't you want that to be, you know, thoughtful? And so the big, I know there's probably some other healthcare organizations here, but sometimes we work with the Mayo Clinic. I was talking to the Cleveland Clinic. You know, the big healthcare organizations, Kaiser's got their own innovation lab. Florida Hospital's got their own innovation lab. They're trying to think of that end-to-end thing. And so we should be partners in that. And so at least through my team, we try and do that. But the thing is to get other co-conspirators to come with us. So that's kind of the challenge, I think, is to get out of that mentality. It helps when the guy that's running the whole company says that we need to do that. So hopefully we're on the right track. Hopefully that answered your question somewhat.
Cool. We have time for a couple more.
I'm not throwing it.
See if he's brave enough to throw it at somebody.
Yeah.
No, don't.
There's somebody over here.
Very good. Nice. Should I stand after that?
Oh, this one first? Okay, sorry. This one first.
Hi, so Diana, Capital One, Small Business Lending. So you were talking before about how to maintain momentum of changes in a team, especially as you engage with product or any other teams. My question is, do you have any strategies or advice that you have for us on how to maintain the momentum as we go through leadership changes?
Okay. Well, some of it was just what we've started to do. In the past, we would run a session, and then we would go, thanks for coming, here's your pictures. We would just give them a folder with photographs from their session. And I realized that was a pretty sucky outcome. It was like we should be giving them a gift. And so we started capturing what actually happened. So there's a document that sort of says, here's what happened. Here's the concepts you guys came up with. Here's the commitment you made to take this further. And we try and hold them accountable. And then on top of that, my team gives them recommendations from our point of view. You really struggle with this. You missed this part. You should go out and do more research. I always tell my team is like, they don't have to listen to us, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't tell them that stuff. They need a little bit of that tough love. The other things that we've tried to do is touch base with them. We've tried to figure out what's the right timing of that. Because we used to touch base a week later. Well, what'd you do? Or a month later, that sort of thing. It helps to have that dialogue with the business leader. So I think what would happen is when the transition happens, there are people that are evangelists that are probably down below that business leader. And you want to tap into them to make sure that they hear the stories. Again, this is about the storytelling part, so that they understand that, hey, everybody's embraced this. This is really part of us now, and we want to keep going. But it is super hard, because sometimes new business leaders come in, they want to put their own thumbprint on things. That was the old leader, so that's a tough one.
More. Yeah.
Hey, hello. Sorry, my first time.
It's weird
doing
talking into a box, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Hi. Anyway, so my name is Carol. I'm with Sparks Grove, and I'm curious it's kind of adding to what her question was around switching leadership, but about your employee experience, because you've been to 2 big companies.
Yep.
And they're more than 30 years in the market, or even more. Like
Hundreds,
right? P&G is like 100 and something.
Yeah.
From your
old.
employee experience, how do you deal with different generation gaps within the company? Because you might have this awesome ideas, you might have a lab that you're able to do that, but how do you cope with either generation gaps that can give you differences in thinking, and how could you coexist with those different,
Okay.
yeah.
So if I could summarize, you're talking about like the crusty old engineer that doesn't want to do anything different?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of interesting. And actually, I think some of that's a little bit of a myth. One of the oldest guys working at Pampers used to tell me, someday you're gonna, design's gonna run the company, and I would laugh at him. It just depends. There's always the naysayers. There's always the people that are like, hey, we've tried that before. A lot of times, the data is the truth, right? I think somebody talked about that a little bit earlier. Is if you can sort of take it away from opinion and talk about, well, but this is what customers are telling us, and this is what we think that means. When I was at Pampers, sustainability, big thing, and a lot of people would like to look at disposable diapers as a pariah there, and we knew that, okay, we had looked at this in the past, but moms didn't really seem to care. But now we thought, okay, things are changing. Moms are changing, their attitudes are changing. We should probably think about this a little bit deeper. But there's definitely some naysayers in the room. I think, maybe to give credit to millennials or something like that, this is how they want to work. They take to it a little bit easier. But we got a lot of older engineers that when we take them through this process, a lot of times they're starting like this. They're standing there and going, my boss made me come here. I don't want to be here. I got emails, and at the end, they're the ones that are playing around at the table, building something. They're just having so much fun because that's what they went to school for. We actually literally had a session called Engineer of the Future because these engineers said, I don't do the work that I thought I was going to do when I came out of college. And so we were trying to figure out ways to sort of tap back into that. So sometimes, again, it's working on the team, so you got to get them personally invested in it, I think. So I can talk to you more about that.